Hi.
Oh, good. There you are. I was like, wait, maybe the invite didn't go through.
No, it did. It did.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? I always forget that like Instagram Live like cuts off half my video and I'm like, oh, where's my face?
I know you always have to be prepared for like which level you're going to be on.
Yes.
No, I'm so excited to do this today. I'm sorry I was running a few minutes late,
No, you're
but
fine.
I'm so excited to have you on.
I'm
So,
excited to be here.
yeah, so obviously today we're really talking about like period problems, like missing, irregular periods, but also mostly in active women, right, in terms of both of our specialties. But why don't you tell everyone what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Elyse Lawry, or your period PT here on Instagram. I am currently a personal trainer and a group fitness instructor, but I'm currently studying to become an exercise physiologist. And my ultimate goal here on Instagram at the moment is just to kind of help other women going through hypothalamic amenorrhea recovery, or HA for short, because it is a bit of a mouthful. And I guess I'll quickly just define what HA is for anyone that hasn't heard of those two words before, but it's basically when you lose your period for at least 3 consecutive months due to stress. So my ultimate goal is to eventually become a recovery coach, and an exercise physiologist who specializes in women's health.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think, like this topic, luckily, is finally kind of gaining ground, becoming more talked about in a lot of different spaces. I feel like even 5 years ago, people were like, oh, you're missing your period, fine. Whereas now a lot of more people are kind of knowledgeable on the topic, getting the news out there. And I think it's so important to bring this topic into the exercise space, right? Because a lot of times, like that HA can be incorporated, like you mentioned, stress, but also in terms of like the level of activity that we're doing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be over exercise either. It could just be simply a lot of training, and also incorporates a little bit of that food aspect as well that can play a part in developing HA. Those three things are such big factors. But again, my point being is that I think it's just so important to be bringing it not just into the diet space, like the food space, but into the exercise space as well, because that's where a lot of women are struggling with this. And, just getting that information out there is so important.
Yes,
Um,
definitely.
so like from a PT, like exercise phys standpoint, like why is this so important to you to kind of get this message out there, like help women with this? I want to hear a little bit more in terms of why you do what you do.
Yeah, well, it's because about 2 years ago now, I had HA, paired with an eating disorder as well, which they aren't mutually exclusive, but they tend to go a bit hand in hand more often. We see that. So that's why I'm really passionate about it, is because I had my own recovery journey. I had to go through all of the different challenges that recovery can bring, really working on my relationship with exercise, because as a personal trainer and someone who was really quite active, not an athlete, but I had people comment on the way that I trained. Was I an athlete? So I don't think you need to necessarily be an athlete to
Mm-hmm.
train like one. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck, is like, oh, well, I'm not an athlete, or I don't do this, so it's okay that my period's missing, or something like that. So it's just really important for me because of just my own personal experience. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up two such important points where like messages can get kind of mixed to women who are struggling with this. Oftentimes we think, oh, well, like my period must be fine because like I don't have any, like my relationship with food's fine. I don't have an eating disorder. So it must be like something else going on. And you bring up such a good point that like they're not mutually exclusive, right? Like this can happen in active women with a completely, or active and non-active women, but also with like a completely healthy relationship with food, and there's just a disconnect somewhere else that we need to address. And also to the point too is like, like you said, like you don't have to necessarily be active to struggle with HA. Obviously, active women and athletes are going to be at a higher risk for it, but at the same time, like you can be any activity level and still struggle with this and still run into this issue. And it's so important to get that message out there.
Definitely, because HA is more about the stress on the body, not, what type of stress it is. So while, yes, exercising and not fueling enough is a big reason we see periods go missing with HA, there are other different types of stresses as well. And it's usually a combination of all of those stresses. And it's really important to not only eat more and exercise less, but to manage those stresses.
Yeah, it's so true. And I worked for a while as a sports dietitian at a college, and I was always surprised by the amount of women who literally, I probably had like a handful of clients at least, or students at that, in that job, that literally would not get their period while they were at school, only to go home, relax a little, stress levels decrease. And again, this is kind of like totally separate from like their food and exercise habits, which may have played a little bit of part, but literally the difference in the stress level between being at school and being home was what was literally driving the HA for them. Like, so it's so interesting for each individual what can actually be driving the issue. And there's a lot of different factors to take into account. So what would you say is, like, being in like more of the exercise space, what would you say is the biggest cause? And I think you've kind of alluded to this, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. What would you say is the biggest cause that you see, whether it be was in yourself or in people that you've worked with or connected with through Instagram?
I think obviously the biggest thing is the lack of knowledge, which was definitely for me, just not even knowing how important our periods were, other than just, oh, you're not pregnant, congratulations. Like, there's so much more to our periods than just fertility and pregnancy. And I think that allows us to kind of just, you know, go without a period and think that it's somewhat normal. But yeah, definitely the biggest thing, other than the knowledge piece, is, you know, the overtraining. And it doesn't even have to look like overtraining. It can just be, you know, not recovering properly, and then adding not eating enough. Because again, I know for myself, I had no idea how much I should be eating. You know, we live in a very diet culture-y society where we're pushed to eat less and exercise more, and that has ultimately caused a lot of people to lose their periods because there's just not that knowledge. There's that kind of missing piece there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think you bring up such a good point with like the knowledge piece, because a lot of what I see too is, you know, we can be unfortunately, like the media and our society focuses a lot, like you mentioned, on terms of like diet culture. Well, they also focus a lot on like diet quality, right? Like, how many times do we open up like a news article or something that's like the top 10 superfoods that you should always be eating, right? And like, so we're talking a lot about like weight loss or what to do to like lose weight in like diet culture space, or we're talking a lot about like quality, but no one's actually teaching us like how to fuel our bodies as women and what that entails in terms of like the bigger picture, right? And I feel like we can feel like we know so much about nutrition, and, you know, I have clients that can like spitball like how many calories are in a cup of blueberries, right? Like, but at the same time, when it comes down to like how much we actually like know in terms of what the bigger picture needs to look like in terms of fueling our body, there I agree, like it's common to have that lack of knowledge, just because unfortunately we're fed the wrong messaging. And it's also not always like, what's the word? It's not always, you know, written for us. Like, we're reading all of the news information, but it's not always filtered for like who we are as individuals. Like, a 60-year-old diabetic could be reading the same article as someone who runs 30 miles per week, right? Like, and that can get really confusing even when we know a lot about nutrition.
Yes,
I
and
think
I
that's
love
such
that
a
you
good
bring
point.
that up. Yeah, it is such a good point, because I know it's starting to change now, but at least like in the science side of things, in terms of nutrition science and exercise science, a lot of the research is done on men who have a completely different hormone profile than those who have female physiology. So when you say that like some of these things aren't written for us, it's really true, because some things that are really good for men's bodies don't work the same way for us.
Exactly. No, it's so true. Unfortunately, because men don't have those like fluctuating hormones every month, like they're just easier to study. So naturally, a lot of the study, they're just like, oh, let's like just tease out all of that stuff we have to deal with. Let's just talk about like the men, right? But exactly like you said, that doesn't mean it applies to us, because we do have those fluctuating hormones. We do have to not just make enough hormones, but we also have to balance those hormones correctly on top of it in order to get a healthy period. And that's what can make it so difficult. And women kind of walking more of a thin line when it comes to it negatively impacting their hormones with their stress, their exercise, or their food. So,
yes. And I think while it can seem like really daunting, it's also a really cool thing because we now have this telltale sign if something's not going right in our body. Like I've just been reading The Fifth Vital Sign by Lisa Henderson Jack, and like it's just incredible all the different things that your menstrual cycle will tell you about your overall health. So it's,
mhm.
yeah, going back to what we said earlier, it's not just about getting pregnant.
Exactly. No, I think that's so good. And actually, you're the second one that's referenced that book in the past like week or two that I've been in contact with. And I'm like, oh, I need to get that book. I just find
It
it so
must be a
interesting.
sign.
Exactly. It's a sign that I need to look into that extra vital sign. I think too, like that brings up a good point because I think one thing that can be so confusing for people as well is because a lot of women are on birth control or do have IUDs or something, which is obviously very important, right? But it can be misleading because it can feel like, oh, well, I'm on birth control, I'm getting a regular period, so I must be fine, right? So do you have any like kind of insight into that or any like, and again, not to de-emphasize the importance of birth control and IUDs
No,
either,
definitely
but
not.
always a
And like,
topic.
yes, and there's no judgment from me because I was on birth control for close to 10 years because I had really bad period pain, I had acne, and I was told that it would, clear all of that up. And at 15 years old, that's all you want is painless periods and clear skin, right? So definitely no judgment because I used it for a very long time and I had the same belief like, oh, I'm getting my period every 10 days, I can skip it when I want to. So like while birth control it can help to a certain degree, it's not going to bring your period back. So you can go on birth control if it's going to kind of slow down the adverse effects of a missing period. But while you're on that birth control, you need to be kind of working towards period recovery because it's not
Mhm.
a long-term solution. It's a band-aid, really, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. It's so true. Like we need to be knowledgeable in terms of what our body needs and what we need to be doing, even when we're or when we're on birth control. So we make sure we're still working in the right direction. That's so important. So what would you say, like from your experience, from like people that you've talked to who have had similar experiences, what would you say are like your three biggest recommendations for like active women, athletes who are kind of, struggling with maybe like their periods completely missing for 3 months or more, or maybe like they're just starting to see kind of irregularities in their periods as well?
Yeah, so it's very different if we're looking at people with HA. Like, obviously, the recovery protocol is to be eating more and resting less, which on paper is quote unquote easy, but it is a lot harder to do psychologically. But if we are just talking about the general population and they're starting to see irregularities in their periods, I would definitely talk to a trusted health professional first. It is kind of your body whispering to you in a way when they go a little bit irregular. If you don't listen, then there's a good chance that they'll just kind of stop completely, and that's your body really trying to get your attention. So I think the biggest things that I would probably say is really incorporating rest days. I was the kind of person that felt like a rest day was a waste of a day, but they are just as important as your training days in order to let your body heal and recover and prepare for the next round of training, whenever that may be. And if you are having troubles with having rest days, I would then look at, you know, the feelings behind that and your relationship with exercise, because that was something that really pointed out to me that my relationship with exercise wasn't as healthy as I thought it was, because I had a lot of these, feelings of guilt or anxiety when taking a rest day, or even just, missing the gym because I felt, under the weather or whatever. And then another thing that's really important is not training fasted, which can kind of get a lot of people, especially women, because it's not good. It's really like we go back to the science behind intermittent fasting, and a lot of that, if not all of it, is done on men, and it does not do the same thing in a female body. So doesn't have to be a massive breakfast. It could just be, you know, a piece of toast and honey, or some orange juice, or just something to put it in your system before working out. And then eating an hour after training as well can also help support your menstrual cycle.
Mm-hmm. That's such an important point, right? Like just in terms of like the intermittent fasting fad that we're going through right now, and kind of where the research is actually been done and where it's actually beneficial and where it's not beneficial. And kind of like you alluded to, like, you know, the concept of low energy availability, I talked about it last week, but can play a part in HA, just basically meaning that what you're intaking is not meeting like what your body needs and like what you're doing on a daily basis. But there can actually be periods of that low energy availability throughout the day, not even in like the whole day's picture, that can lead to hormonal disruption. So exactly what you're alluding to when we're doing like a fasted workout. If we wake up and do a workout at 7 a.m. and it's like a 45-minute hour workout, even if it's shorter than that, and we don't get home and eat something until like, you know, after we shower at like 8:39, like that's a long period to be in an energy deficit for, which can definitely cause some hormonal disruption. So I love that you bring that up, because I just feel like that's so important for people to know, and such a common thing that we're seeing women doing right now because of the fad of intermittent fasting.
Yes, 1,000%.
Yeah. So anything that I didn't ask that you think would be helpful for people to know, or you'd love to give more insight into?
Not that I can think of. I think we covered pretty much everything, you know, just the importance of, you know, your menstrual cycle in terms of, you know, your bone and heart health, I think is really important to mention quickly. You know, when we go through menopause, we're at a high risk of osteoporosis and cardiovascular events like heart attacks and things like that because of the hormone estrogen. And
Mm-hmm.
like, without getting like too super sciencey, because that's where my brain loves to go, obviously estrogen is produced predominantly by your ovaries through your menstrual cycle. And when your menstrual cycle stops, say in menopause, we lose those, you know, bone protective, heart protective hormone, estrogen. And it's the same sort of thing when you have a missing period. You're not producing enough estrogen, so then you are at a higher risk of these things. And, you know, when you've got young women losing their periods in the years that they're meant to really be building their bone density, it can be quite, I know it can be, for me, I feel quite, you know, intimidated by it. But obviously it can be reversed most of the time by getting your period back. But I think that's just really important to mention, because we talked about periods not just being important for pregnancy, but what else are they important for?
No, I think that's so like such a good point to bring up, especially with the heart health and the bone health too. Because like you said in the beginning, like we think about, oh, period, reproduction. Oh, I don't want to get pregnant right now. Okay, who cares, right? But like it's so much more than that, and it is that additional sign that like just something's not being met in our body, and it's not just fertility that goes wrong in those instances, is other things too. And I think those are the messages that we really need to be getting out there. So thank you so much for including that. I think that's so important. So yeah, if people want to learn more from you, like where can they find you on Instagram? What's your handle?
Yeah, just at your period PT. Yeah, that's it for now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. I think this was such a
Thank you for
helpful
having me.
conversation to so many. I
Yeah,
love
I'm
what
glad
you're
we had
doing
it.
too.
Likewise.
All right. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.